let him take over. So thank you for understanding that. Again, my name is Renelle, and I am a parent advocate and coordinator of the Mental Health and Emotional or Behavioral Disorders Project at PACER Center. As some of you know, PACER is a statewide nonprofit, parent-directed organization in Minnesota with a mission to expand opportunities and enhance the lives of children with all disabilities and their families. I've worked at PACER as an advocate and trainer for 20 years, coming to that position after teaching, working as a school-based mental health professional, and parenting 4 children, including a son with developmental disability and mental health needs. I've served on the Minnesota's school-wide positive behavior interventions and supports leadership team and the emotional behavioral disorders leadership team at the state as well. I'm currently serving my 15th year as a member of the state subcommittee on children's mental health. I will be one of your presenters today. I would now typically turn it over to Hassan, but let me introduce Hassan for you quickly. Or Jesus, you can introduce Hassan. You
okay.
Want to speak for him.
Yes.
Sorry.
Well, good morning. This is going to be strange, but because you're going to hear a Somali man with a Latino accent. But we expect that Hassan will be here soon, and I will be reading from his notes. My name is Hassan Samantar, and I am a parent advocate and trainer for PACER Center. I am originally from Somalia and have worked at PACER Center as a community outreach specialist and advisor to Somali parents. I translate materials into Somali, provide workshops for parents and professionals, and work individually with Somali parents to help them understand the resources and support available for children and youth with disabilities. I have also served on several district interagency early intervention outreach committees and collaborate with state and federal agencies on mental health and autism spectrum disorder projects. I am the parent of a child with a health impairment and have been at PACER staff for 9 years.
Ambani Jean is our multicultural specialist, parent advocate, and trainer at PACER Center, and is African American. She is a member of the Minnesota Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities, an evaluator for the Minnesota Council for Quality, and a member of the Monitoring and Technical Assistance Review System team for the Federal Administration on Developmental Disabilities. She has had an extensive background working with high school students as a behavior specialist and an educator and director at an early learning center. As the parent of 2 children with developmental disabilities, she has used her parenting experiences to help other parents and has also written a book called How Big is the Fly? Asking the Right Question.
Hola, buenos días. My name is Jesus Villasenor, and I am a parent advocate here at PACER Center, and I'm on my 20th year. And I have, right off the bat, a couple of disclaimers to make. The first one, I hope that you understand that I am not speaking for all the Latinos in Minnesota or the United States. There's a big diversity in our culture, and in what though we have in common is that we speak Spanish and we come from over 20 countries that do so. But keep that in mind. The second one is that throughout the years now in Minnesota, as young as the Latino community is here, there are now Latinos that were born here, and they are, for all purposes, Americans. Many of them may not even speak Spanish. So I advocate for parents that come from abroad whose experience is very limited in what has to do with the special education or the Law of Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So I work with parents, in few words, parents that don't speak English and that have not been acculturated. And what I do at PACER is give them voice in IEP meetings, in special education plan meetings, or other meetings with professionals, and I do advocacy in a very individualized way, and I help also disseminate the law and the information on IDEA, doing translations and other written information. I also do presentations in Spanish and presentations also for staff or professionals in how to work with Latino families.
My name is Tasha, and I'm a parent advocate here at the PACER Center. I have been a PACER for the last 25 years, and I came to the United States over 38 years ago when I was 19 then. I have 7 adult children, 1 adult daughter with a cognitive disability, and an adult son with mental health needs. She actually brought me to PACER a long time ago. So I do provide information and resource to Southeast Asian American families through individual support, translate material, and workshop. What we mean by Southeast Asian American is that these are the family who came to America right after 1975, when the Vietnam War was over. So we include Hmong, Lao, Cambodia, and Vietnamese.
Thank you. The first section of today's webinar is meant to provide some foundational thoughts related to the challenges that providers and others may be experiencing related to helping culturally diverse families of children with behavioral health needs, and for them to be able to find successful support. The first question we might want to consider is, why do we even need to pay attention to cultural diversity? While white Americans continue to be the racial majority with over 70% share of the US population per the last census, which was now almost 10 years ago, so it was in 2010, Black, Hispanic, Latino, and Asian Americans are projected to grow at nearly twice the rate of white Americans in the next 3 decades. Recently, the American Community Survey, which produces yearly population and demographic estimates in between the 10-year census data collection, estimated that white Americans now make up about approximately 60% of our total population. Yet despite the fact that the United States is a diverse country, racially and ethnically, current research has indicated that there is no significant difference in parents' interests in their child's success based on race, ethnicity, socioeconomic class, or cultural background. Thus, any fundamental differences in how parents from diverse cultures relate to providers have their origin in ethnic and cultural differences, including psychosocial factors, such as family structure, value systems, interactional patterns, or coping strategies. In turn, these factors are affected by a family's level of acculturation, as Jesus has already mentioned. Research also tells us that wellness, which is not just the absence of illness or stress, but is about having good physical and mental health, is important for successful outcomes in life. Knowing that this common ground of a parent's interest in their child's well-being and success transcends culture, race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic class, there are still challenges for providers and others on working effectively with diverse families of children and youth with behavioral health challenges. Because our world experiences are different from one another, it's important to consider how our perceptions or the meanings we place on what we see or do affect relationships. Our interpretation of behavior is filtered through our own unique cultural experiences, expectations, and practices, as well as through our formal education. Different cultures also can filter impressions through their specific cultural beliefs, practices, and education. We need to be careful if we think that our interpretation is the only interpretation or the accurate one or the right way to consider behaviors, for example, because then we are concluding that other interpretations are lacking in accuracy. The truth is that what we see is defined not by what we are necessarily looking at, but how we perceive what we are looking at. This is an inescapable product of our cultural training and life experience, and is such an ingrained set of beliefs that we must check as often as possible with others who may not share these beliefs in order to be sure we are truly understanding. Often when we learn about culture, it is what we are exposed to through typically our senses. We try new foods, we celebrate or appreciate new music, we admire traditional dress. This surface level is what is seen during celebrations in communities, at schools, through the arts. Sometimes when we're shopping at the mall or grocery shopping, we might see somebody dressed in their native garb. It really is what we can call visible culture. It represents a mere fraction of one's cultural experience. If we get the songs wrong or mistakenly call cultural dress a costume, somebody might be mildly offended, but it is seldom seen as a serious problem. Most culture is completely submerged and can only be learned through long-term exposure or direct observation over time. When we breach an understood cultural rule, for example, we have a different concept of time, or we fail to appropriately greet a guest in a way that meets their cultural expectations, we can run the risk of offending them. A handshake is a classic example. Some people prefer a firm handshake and may believe that people who do not share that preference are weak or untrustworthy. Those who prefer a gentle hand touch may see those with a firmer grip as aggressive or controlling. These daily transactions result in mistaken assumptions about intent and can cause hurt feelings. When the occurrences relate to how a family raises a child, hurt feelings can quickly become an offense that is difficult to overcome. The deeper one goes into culture, the greater the risk of offending if rules are breached. Rules governing how people relate to one another, or those unconscious rules, are those things we learn early in life when we first begin to explore the world. Think for a second, what is your definition of mental health or behavioral health? What do pauses in conversation mean to you? How do you react to touch, to eye contact? How do we determine our comfort zone for physical proximity? These are the kinds of unconscious rules that can provoke strong negative responses, even hostility, when people feel disrespected. Cultural meaning varies from culture to culture because different groups of people have determined different ways to solve common life problems, like how to make a living, keep order, or defend themselves. So it's really important to understand the depth of the cultural experience and that it's way more than what typically meets the eye. The importance of how our basic communication preferences affect our abilities to get along in society cannot be overstated. Cross-cultural communication can be thought of as a broad continuum of preferences. Chances are that you hold at least some beliefs and practices that will be different from those of the families you work with and serve, children you serve. The key question is how those preferences you hold will affect your relationships with them. For some individuals, in some groups, polite conversation is characterized by a soft voice. Being polite, not disagreeing, may also be an important cultural value. It may be even inappropriate in some cultures for a person to mention if they have been offended. For others, polite conversation includes being able to speak out honestly, even if it means interrupting or speaking loudly. In general, Americans tend to be direct, even confrontational at times, when having an animated conversation. This can be quite intimidating or even feel threatening for those unfamiliar with this communication style. Some people prefer a long pause between speakers, while others will interrupt a conversation, and both will consider their communication style to be the correct one. Think about how you can be flexible in your conversational style. and pay attention to how the families you are working with communicate with you. And your communication style can adjust to help them feel more comfortable and competent. For example, direct inquiry, asking a specific question. What do you do for a living? May be particularly problematic for individuals who are traditional within specific cultures such as Native American, Hispanic, or Asian. For these parents, asking direct questions can feel confrontational or accusatory, even when that's not the intent. A more indirect conversational style, like, you take good care of your family, you must have a good job, can you tell me a little bit about it, is often more successful, especially if you have told the family something about yourself first. It then becomes more of a friendly conversation about occupations rather than an interview. Communicating tends to be less direct for some immigrants, including those who might be Caucasian. For example, there are some who are Russian speaking, and family members may rely on direct statements or hints when communicating about sensitive topics. You'll want to listen for these hints and explore them in a sensitive way. Decision-making is another area that needs consideration. Some families will defer to professional expertise, while others will want to be in charge of their decisions. Some will want to think about a conversation for a day or two, or even longer, before making decisions. Some cannot make decisions in a meeting, but must take information back to others who help with that process. It could be an extended family, a trusted elder, a person who does religious guidance or spiritual support. Some families get lost in rapid-paced conversation, while others prefer this kind of give and take. When families work with others who tend to be in control of a conversation, especially a conversation style, sometimes they'll just do as the provider suggests. Others may not follow through with the services that were agreed on, or some may just drop out. That may not be specific to that they don't want the service or don't feel comfortable with it. It just may be that they don't feel that they're a part of the decision. So think about direct and indirect communication, formal and informal communication, mannerisms, body language, eye contact, physical approach. Never assume that you're comfortable doing. Never assume what you are comfortable doing to connect with someone from another culture is automatically understood or meets their needs. Being aware of communication as a continuum of preferences based on culture and learning from what you're observing is always going to be a more respectful way to initiate open conversation when working with culturally diverse families. Let's think a little bit about the impact of diversity. What would it be like if you had to stay overnight in a stranger's home, someone you had never met before? Would they know if you were a vegetarian, what kinds of foods you preferred? Would they know whether you liked wine with dinner or whether you didn't drink, or whether they dressed formally or informally? Would you know religious preferences that might be important during your visit? If these things were known, you would be less likely to risk offending the person you were visiting or staying with. You would know how to dress, whether a gift of wine would be appropriate. They would know what you'd like to eat. Of course, you could show up not knowing anything, but then you might risk doing or saying something that might unintentionally make them uncomfortable. So culture is like that too. The more we know about a family, their likes and dislikes, child rearing practices, preferences, educational level, the more likely that we will be able to avoid breaching important cultural boundaries and help the family to understand that we care about their child. Because a mental health provider may be in the life of a family for a few years, it helps to make a good impression from the start and to know how to meet the family without walking into invisible but very real boundaries. The next section of today's webinar is going to talk about strategies for meeting with families. This content is very relevant to both formal and informal meetings or situations when you are interacting with a family. So I decided to ask our multicultural advocates to share with you how they make a first contact with a family. Jesus?
Yes. In my work here at PACER, well, first of all, I want for you to know that it's valid, I think, to say that Latinos, we don't feel very comfortable speaking or dealing with business over the phone. We prefer all communication to be face-to-face. And so what happens when I get a call from parents, and believe me, it's still very hard for parents to make phone calls when it's especially related to their children with special needs. So I keep the intake pretty much to the basic, name, address, phone number, and then I immediately proceeded to ask if it's okay to do a home visit. And that has been proven to be the most effective way for me to establish pretty much the first contact is through a home visit. So that way we get to meet personally and we can talk about things that are considered delicate for families. And also, as of almost like from the very first conversation, to establish and to explain what confidentiality is, because especially with the Latino community in this country, the issue of legal status is a sensitive one. So families won't open if they are not sure that their information may be known to people that may hurt them. So I have to assure them that whatever conversation we're going to have there is just going to stay there. And so I really insist that in every time that you use, if you need to use an interpreter, that interpreter is in charge of doing that and explaining that from the beginning. Now.
Hi, it is Dao again. In my community, for those families who don't have telephone, or you simply cannot reach by phone, the best way is to mail relevant information. That will include your telephone number so that they can call if they want to know more. Be sure that to include a sentence or two about confidentiality. And in that letter, clearly explain the purpose of the meeting and what the anticipated outcome will be. Explain who will participate and what they will specifically be doing during the meeting. And be sure to discuss, to tell the family about their role and how they will ask or how can they participate during the meeting. Also encourage family who want some other, like extended family member, to participate, and encourage them to do so. Hassan?
Hello.
And we're glad that Hassan made it. And Hassan, we already introduced you, so feel free to say anything
But we
about
introduced
yourself.
you with a Latino accent,
Right.
so now you're gonna be the authentic.
My apologies. With this weather, things sometimes you cannot predict. I had a little car accident this morning. My wife had a car accident, so I had to help her out. Again, I'm sorry. My name is Hassan, and I'm a Somali advocate at PACER Center. Because our community has been born out of a tribal culture, there are some specific ways to meet with the parents without offending them or without stepping in boundaries that you're not sure how to deal with. State some ideas. You can use introduction to connect with a parent. Greet the family in a way that is directly respectful. Having a little conversation beforehand, before you get down to the business, and conversating with the parents go really long way and it really breaks that. It can be used as a good icebreaker. At a first meeting, begin by sharing a little personal background information about yourself, including why you went into this profession and what you especially enjoy about it. Explain your professional role. What is your intent of that day to do there, and what do you hope the outcome would be? Why you are there, and what part you will play on the team in the future as well. If new providers get involved during the treatment process, make certain they do the same exactly. If you need to greet and address the parents, and you're not quite sure if you should address the mother or the father, or how the role plays in the dynamic of the parent, make sure that you greet both parents, both the mother and the father. And sometimes expect that some extended parents, family, like a grandmother, grandfather, to be present in that meeting as well. Let the family inform you if there's a preference that who you should address or who makes the decisions. It's a very common that many families, many Somali families, that mothers may be in charge or may be in trust of anything that have something to do with raising the children or the house dynamic, and fathers to be a breadwinner and work outside and may not be really in tune what is going on in the father. That has been culturally the norm back home, and it tends to continue the same. Respect the family structure, even when it's not your own experience and value system. It will not be unusual for extended family members to be present, as I said, when you arrive at home. These may or may not be blood-related relatives, but are still included as a family. The parents should determine who to include in the process. No matter how you personally feel about any culture practice that is different from your own, you must be willing to be open and receptive to the differences. This does not mean that you must agree or disagree, just that you are willing to enter into a new cultural exchange in order to serve the child and the family effectively. Because the first meeting is so critical, you may wish to call a cultural center that serves that specific culture or groups, and tell them about yourself and your desire to build a partnership with the parents. Get answers to some of the above questions and others that come to mind as you think about the families that you be willing or you will be working with. Dao?
Thank you, Hassan. This is Dao again. Well, within the Hmong community, meeting with parents might be different. For example, a Hmong family might want to invite extended family member or the shaman or other community healers to the meeting. And some of these members might already provide spiritual ceremonies, soon calling, or traditional massage to relieve muscle pressure, or many of these members play an important role to support family. And they may be able to provide information that can be incorporated into the goals for the child and the family. Your flexibility of where and when to meet and pay attention to those information that these community members provide are helpful and show your interest in serving them. Renelle?
Thank you. And again, I'm going to take over for Bonnie Jean, who's an African-American advocate at PACER Center. In her notes, she wrote that African-American families are very matriarchal in structure and in decision-making. So she said, be sure that you keep that in mind and you honor the hierarchy of the family structure. The actual person who makes a decision might be the grandmother, not necessarily the mother, who's also actively involved in parenting or caring for the children. You're working on figuring out and trying to serve. Be sure that when explaining your services or the things you are proposing, be sure that you know they may be new or unfamiliar. The African American community, just because they have been in the United States for a longer period of time, do not necessarily believe that systems are there to help them be successful. And so you want to be aware that the systems or the supports you're talking about may be new to them or unfamiliar, and they may be positive. You know, previous interactions with systems may have been very negative. And so you want to make sure that you can explain those services and explain them in a positive way that will benefit their families or their children. You want to also understand that families have unique needs and may need help in understanding how those services that you're explaining can match to what that child specifically needs. So even if the process was explained in a pre-meeting contact or over the phone, continue to pay attention about describing each part of the process as you go along and invite the parents to ask questions at any time. And be sure to check for understanding and offer examples of how the service may help or how you've seen it help in previous ways. Be sensitive and alert to clues to the family's emotional state as you determine what issues to address and how to address them. It may be very often African American families will initially say there's nothing wrong with my child. It's the situation that's going on, it's the school that they're in, it's you know, something else that's causing these problems, and it's not the child that's having the problem. So it's important to acknowledge that viewpoint and recognize it may take time to develop enough trust in the relationship for the parent to really hear and consider your input. I wish that Ambani Jean were here to give you some specific examples. I don't feel capable of doing that, so I'm just going to go ahead and pass it on to Dow. But to know that if you have other questions related to working with African American families, that Ambani Jean is an advocate here at PACER Center who could help you answer those questions. Dow?
Thank you, Renelle. Many diverse families show the hospitality and respect by offering refreshment to guests. For example, I went to the meeting with a county case worker and some staff from the school. And when we arrived at the family home, the family already have food on the table. That was lunchtime, so they knew that we were coming. So when we entered home, and the family greet us and invite us for a lunch before we can proceed the meeting. Well, this is a nice way to for the family to show to provide hospitality for all us, and we thank them. However, there was a reluctance of county case worker and school staff, not sure if they're going to have lunch with the family or not. However, we all did, and I think that if you go to a Hmong family, to meet a Hmong family, and you cannot accept those hospitality they provide, then maybe you can bring your own, just like a bottle of water, so that when every family offer that, you say you already have to show them. Right after the meeting, the mother also gave the county caseworker a phone bag with Hmong embroidery, and which was very, very good. However, the caseworker could not offer this, could not accept this. So I told the mother that I thank you for your offer, but she cannot accept that. So I will encourage professionals to follow your professional judgment as well as your employee policy, whether or not you accept the gift. However, express a patient will be very much appropriate. Jesus?
Thank you, Dan. So I hope you understand that assumption is the biggest enemy of an effective communication. So we have to be very aware that, when we're making assumptions, because they usually lead us to the wrong direction. So in the case of language, we cannot assume that just because Latino family has been living in the United States for several years, that we can assume that they already have acquired the language that they need to communicate. Many times even names are not an accurate indication of their language capabilities. It's kind of often that I would get a call from Mary Lopez, whose name before getting married to Juan Lopez was Mary Knudsen. And when I address her in Spanish, she would say, "I'm sorry, you have a very thick accent and I can understand your English." So we have to be very purposely in the needs that the family have in means of communication. So the first thing to ask is to ask the families if they need an interpreter. Is best practice is definitely I really strongly recommend never to use family members for being interpreters, especially their children, because in doing so we are giving the children a position of power in the family structure that they shouldn't have, and also because the accuracy of the interpretation is going to be really doubtful, especially when it comes to describe emotions or when the subject matter is inappropriate for a minor to have with a professional in front of the parent. If an interpreter is being used, depend on him or her to be the expert on the language and culture. And even if you have some familiarity with the language, be careful with that. If no interpreter is available, my advice is to postpone that appointment to a later date. I don't see any possibility that you could have an effective communication without an interpreter, and there's always the risk that a misinterpretation will taint forever the consequences of that information. Even when the family speaks English, do not assume that they can read at the reading level of many documents. We, in the special ed field, we're always giving parents procedural safeguards that by law they need to get in English, and actually they are translated into Spanish, and yet is a language level of college that many parents don't have access to. So be aware of that. Check frequently for understanding. Offer to explain unfamiliar words and acronyms. If you are taking notes, read what you have written to the parent before giving them the document. If you discover the parent cannot read materials, or offer to provide the information in a different format, for instance, a tape recorded version, etc. Renelle?
There are also some very basic and universal things that transcend culture and are worth remembering when meeting with parents, especially culturally diverse parents. You want to help parents understand their participatory role. Many will not know what their role should be, especially if they come from a very different cultural worldview. Some may find the concept of equal partner foreign because authority for decisions remained with the professionals in their lives. To ensure that parents understand rights, it's important to know how they view the idea of rights. In many cultures, group interests are paramount to individual interests. Rights that focus on the individual might not be as important to some families as rights that protect the interdependence of the entire group. Building rapport and finding ways to agree may be more important to some parents than the individual goals for their child. This can be a major factor in parents not exercising or valuing their rights, particularly if those rights are focused on that individual child and not on the entire family. At the conclusion of the meeting, explain what will happen next in the process and provide an anticipated timeline for future activities. Encourage parents to call you or connect with you if questions or concerns arise between your next scheduled meeting, and end the visit on a positive note. Praise the child or the family's strength, thanking them for their valuable input and participation. Just remember that ending a meeting is what's probably going to be remembered when you want to start your next meeting. So make a conscious effort to end that meeting as positively and as supportive as you can. Cultural differences have importance in how to introduce the concept of rights, depending on whether the parent has been in the U.S. a long time or is a recent arrival. The parent's belief system regarding their role in keeping their child well, being involved in their education, and using other systems of care are huge predictors of their involvement. Rather than using the word rights at the beginning of a meeting, it's maybe more effective to help parents understand how highly their role is valued in planning, and by reinforcing their expertise in understanding and expressing the needs of their child. Find out what interventions have been traditionally used with children with mental health needs. Learn as much as you can about that individual family. Be sure that services and supports discussed fit into their comfort zone. The rights bestowed on parents can be explained as a structure for building agreement and a way to honor the knowledge and input of the family. Now I'm going to let our multicultural advocates talk briefly, because I knew we were going to run out of time, about strategies for working with families. We'll start with Jesus.
Well, briefly. Well, families often feel that they will be judged on how they are parenting their child. The extra demands of having a child with mental health needs, as well as the size of the family, may make it especially challenging. Families may be reluctant to invite company into a situation that they feel may reflect badly on their family or on their parenting skills. If the family is hesitant to meet or have services in their home, you may want to offer the option of finding another location in the community. Realistically, some people do judge families, and it may show up in reports, how they are written and what they say. Because even confidential records can be subpoenaed, it is very important to be unbiased and accurate. Now, families are often wary of strangers in their home, especially those from outside their culture. Even when you're pressed for time, it is essential to devote time to conversation and activities that will help build trust into the families, and always remember that for Latino families, the family structure is very important to asking for the welfare of, how the parents are doing, how their older children are doing, including them in the conversation can go a long way to create that comfort. So, Hassan?
Now, this may not be unique to Somali families, but in many Somali and Asian homes, it's better not to initiate the handshake unless the individual extends their hand to you first. Depending on the individual's religion belief, physical contact may be inappropriate at certain times. It's not just the Somali or Muslim families that express the preference against the physical touch. Some Eastern European cultures may prefer to avoid cross-gender and a physical contact as well. As I alluded before earlier, when you arrive, state the purpose of the meeting and the length of the appointment up front. Do your best to end on time. Even when families have other activities on their own schedule, they may be reluctant to interrupt you or inform you that there's a need to end the visit, as this is considered to be not respectful in the culture. Tao.
Thank you, Hassan. In some Asian home, family may use a combination of Western and Eastern medicine, philosophies, and approach. This may include the use of massage, herbal remedies, acupuncture, and other healing practice. In some Hmong family, parents may use traditional massage to relieve the pressure almost daily. Include this intervention as strength of the family in finding ways to work with the child. For example, if the child will benefit from a play therapy, find out first what the family may already be doing in the area of developing social behavior. Remember that many Hmong families have many children, and they use all the siblings to do this. In other family may involve the child in the community or in a home with a therapist, and see if these things you can incorporate this work in that natural setting.
And Bonnie G wanted us to remember with African American families that all African American parents teach their children respect for elders. But if trouble starts, some are taught to use the Old Testament adage, an eye for an eye concept, while others may be taught for fear of zero tolerance policies to bring their problems home to trusted elders. So think about the different beliefs about their child's success that these families might have about their child's success as an adult. Mental health and treatment reflects a Western perspective. And the differences between providers and the family in meeting the needs of children with behavioral or mental health struggles for culturally diverse families can be exasperating. It can be surprising, however, for having knowledge about how the family believes will also lead to a better understanding of the family's focus, what they see as the important areas of learning and growth for their child. So remember that those different expectations for their child receiving services may be very different from yours, and to have at least some perspective and some recognition of how parents are perceiving their child and the future they want them to have. Again, there are some strategies for working with families that we could just briefly show you. Open-ended questions encourage parents to communicate rather than simply answer a question. For example, asking, how you could be of help to the family after you've been able to identify what some of the needs or concerns are, asking what their hopes and dreams are for their child, asking them, what they know about their child's needs and if they can help them with identifying more specific interventions or supports for their child. So those open-ended questions are important. During a meeting, a parent may appear to understand what's being said, but not really understand at all. And if asked directly, the parent will typically say, yes, I understand, I hear what you're saying. But remember that they may not. So check for understanding in informal ways as you go along. Does that make sense to you? What questions does that raise for you? Does this sound right to you? Are you okay with what to do next? So offering to partner in the process of service provision is really important for multicultural families who come from a diverse and different background of thinking about how things should be happening for their families and who should be benefiting. Now I'm going to briefly let Hassan, Jesus, and Dow talk very briefly about some specific things that they want you to know about the families they work with. Hassan?
Thank you, Renelle. Now, as an advocate for Somali families, I see some challenge on how to provide culturally respectful services. But the developing relationships with the Somali families is not unlike developing relationships with other families who are challenged through their cultural differences. Taking the time to get to know the family through informal conversation is very helpful. This helps to establish a sincere and a respectful climate that can set the stage for a good communication during more difficult times. Be prepared to address language challenges with the interpreter as well as the family. Now, if you're using an interpreter agency, make sure if you can spare to sit down with your interpreter beforehand and go over the material that you want them to interpret. Some Western concepts are not translatable and have to be explained through examples. Recognize the difference in expectation for development and age-appropriate skills. Things such as milestone achievements for children are not part of our culture. For example, most Somali children have not been exposed to structure before coming to this country. Things like sitting in a classroom, and standing in a line, scheduled meal time, or waiting for your turn is a foreign concept. Because of this, Somali children may initially look disruptive, inattentive, or sometimes even aggressive. Somali families struggle with the concept of a mental illness. As immigrants, they feel an intense pressure to succeed, if not to excel, in part to justify their parents' sacrifices. A lot of Somali parents who work hard on longer hours frequently remind their children that they left their home country to provide better opportunities for them. As a result, the pressure to succeed and the expectation to succeed is very intense. These expectations often prevent early intervention as well. Immigrant families are also unfamiliar with the social system of care that we have in this country. They are fearful of giving out too much information because they do not understand the idea of a confidentiality. Seeking help from a mosque is a common practice in the Somali community because mosque plays a singular important role. That is the place they turn to for safety and to heal what they believe in a spiritual sickness rather than psychiatrist crisis. And although doctors and lawyers are respected, religious persons have an unrivaled standing in the community, even among those who are not religious. Somali language is not compatible with the words used to describe mental health or mental illness. There's no word, for instance, for depression in the Somali language. There are a lot of immigrants who have been worked up to the headaches by a neurologist when they were really suffering something as simple as maybe depression. Somali parents actually encourage marriage almost as a cure for mental illness. Families don't view mental illness as a sickness or illness, but as a family curse sometimes, and they try to take care of themselves. Bonnie's not here, but I will turn to Pranell.
And Bonnie just wanted you to know that, she writes, to look at me, you would not knew that I grew up in Europe and the United States. And she mentions that fact about herself to remind us not to make assumptions based on appearance. Every family has a different culture, even if they have the same ethnicity. Some are loud, some are not. She said, when visiting a family in my community, it's important to share history about yourself, why you choose to work with children, so to establish your validity as a provider and as a person, a professional. She also said it's very important, if you do not understand something you have seen or heard, to not make assumptions, but to ask for clarification. And always affirm with the parents what you are proposing or doing with their child, and put it into the context of the services that you're providing. When building relationships with African American families, stay transparent and always check for understanding. Don't just ask, you understand. She also felt it's important to repeat initial contact information and state over and over during your intake. This is your contact person if you have any questions, concerns, or if you need to reschedule for any reason. So make sure there's a point person for them to connect with. And in the African American community, it's respectful to address an adult using the term Mr., Ms., Miss, or Ms. Children are taught from a very early age that this is a sign of respect. Jesus?
Yes, we have said before that the Latino families have many different levels of acculturation. There's great diversity, so you cannot, again, don't make assumptions. Every family is different. So that's why it really is essential to establish trust to good communication, plan what you're gonna say, and then cut it in half. There's sometimes people that are overwhelmed with information. And just briefly, and if we can go to the next, I know that we're out of time. There is a stigma in the Latino community still about mental health. Many Latino families experience a great sense of loss when they come to the United States. The close-knit family unit that is characteristic of Latino families has been disrupted, and close relatives, extended families, and friends have been left behind. Latinos find themselves alone in a new country, in a survival mode, and with no sense of security. And let's add to this the stress caused by the current political climate that everybody knows. In Minnesota, we had 7,000 applications from Dreamers. I think that by now everybody knows what a Dreamer is, and these are children that came to this country with no decision of their own. They brought here by their parents. They, by all means, they are Americans, and but this is causing a lot of stress and can have a strong impact on mental health. So the good news is that gradually Latino families are losing the fear related to the stigma and are starting to be aware of symptoms that may guide them to look for resources to meet their mental health needs, including the impact that mental health, the impact of mental health on children with disabilities. I know of many Latino families who benefit from individual and family counseling. The bad news is that as their awareness grows, the resources do not. And we are finding, at least in Minnesota, the Latino mental health providers, especially for children, are less and less available. Down.
Okay. Many South Asian families will seek help and resource in a different way, be open to their needs and validate the attempts. Be sure to consider how they view their child's mental health needs and understand it. You should not attempt to westernize their view of mental health. That will cause them to lose trust and confidence in you. Focus on their strengths and incorporate traditional practice into your approach. They will show respect and honored. Many South Asian families do not understand the Western concept of mental health. They believe the cause of the problem is either from an evil spirit or a curse. Many don't think a mental health condition like post-traumatic stress disorder is due to the past trauma, but it's from the challenge of meeting the daily responsibility to their family and making a new life in the strange and family country. Other things that other condition like a panic disorder is just like a physical condition. I have a son with couple episodes of mental health, and he always thinks that his depression is a way to become a Buddhist or a shaman. And he dreams of being with this spirit and believe that he will heal if he become a monk or a shaman himself. Whatever the tradition and belief is, understand the perception is significant. Believe it or not, people will be comfortable with what they experience, or sometimes they will do anything that come to their mind in the hope to heal the condition. They will only seek outside help when what they have used is not working. For example, I have a daughter who has in the first episode of depression and stay away for 2 nights. I didn't know what to do then. And I consult my parents, my cousin, who were shaman. My wife gave her a sleeping pill, which did not help. We took her for a long drive to St. Cloud, and that did not help either. And she became more delusional. After I researched many of those traditional resources, I then called our county crisis hotline and was told to bring her to the hospital. She was treated for a week. A year later, she has another episode, but we knew what to do from our early experience. And even though she has for example, if she has an episode today, we may still seek help from those traditional resources. Well,
So remember that what you and the family have in common is the well-being and development of the child. As a professional, you have the responsibility of initiating a respectful relationship with family. However, that responsibility for sustaining the relationship is shared by you and the family of the child. Working effectively with families from diverse cultures, we've heard, does not require you to become a cross-cultural expert. However, it does require you to be more intentional and thoughtful in your communication with parents and families who come from a culture or tradition different than your own. Our hope in sharing this information is that you will find opportunities to use what we have offered to you from this training in ways that work and lead to better outcomes for the families and children to whom you are providing services and supports. Because in the end, every family has their own culture. If you would like to ask any specific questions, we've had a couple come in during this webinar, and we're out of time, but we certainly will be paying attention to those questions and can answer them. If you've identified who you are, we'll be happy to answer them through an email later. Or you can also call us. You have PACER's contact information, you have the names of our multicultural advocates. So feel free to get in touch with us or send us a quick email. We'll be happy to answer your questions then. Partnerships are not easy, but they do yield tremendous rewards. And we definitely want to be sure to thank you for the work that you do to help support families who have children with behavioral health needs and from different cultures. Thank you for attending. We are asking you to try to complete this evaluation survey by January 26th, but the survey will be open until
I believe it's open until January 31st. Again, for some people who jumped in maybe a little late, we will be sending you an email with a link to a survey, and upon completion of that survey, you will have access to the certificate of attendance. So look for that email either later today or tomorrow.
Great. Thank you so much. Glad you made it through the snowstorm and were able to connect with us today. And I'm sorry we went a little bit late, but we appreciate all the work that you do. Take care.
Gracias.